Hi, what's going on everybody? Welcome to my second video, and in this video we'll be dealing about CSS selectors. So CSS, it is one of the most important web designing language that any web developer should know. And so thinking about CSS, the first thing that comes to our mind is the selectors, and of course the properties too. But still, the selectors, they play the most important part in CSS. They are used for selecting a particular HTML part of the document or the DOM. So knowing about CSS selectors is very important for a web designer. Every beginning web developer should know about the advanced CSS selectors. So in this video I'll be dealing about the advanced CSS selectors that you could possibly think of, and that you could mostly use in your projects. So let's get started and see about the CSS selectors. So I just have a sample document right here. It is just a sample document with some paragraph elements, an ordered list, checkboxes, and so on. And so here is the particular markup for that document, and I do have a style sheet linked to that, and that is right here. So this is currently empty, and we'll be dealing with the selectors in this style sheet. And so there are three basic selectors in in CSS. They are the tag selector, the class selector, and the ID selector. So every class selector will just begin with the class with begin with the dot and followed by the class name, and every ID selector will just begin with the hash symbol followed by the ID name. For example, in this case, this paragraph has an ID of para. So what I'm going to do is, in CSS, I'm going to use hash para, and that would select the the paragraph, this paragraph right here. And so suppose if I'm going to change the color, uh, sorry, to blue, and just refresh this, you can see that the color has changed to blue. So that is the ID selector. And similarly, if I'm just going to change the class name to para and add a dot here, then a dot, and refresh the page. I'm so sorry about that. Let's refresh the page, and that is the same output because I've just changed the color and the style is the same. And so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the ID select, the element selector. For example, if I'm going to use P, then that would select every paragraph that is present inside this document. So that would be something like P, and save this, refresh the page, and you can see that every single paragraph that is present inside this document has changed its color to blue. And so that is about selecting the entire paragraph element. And so the next thing that we could see is the adjacent selectors, or no, the child selectors. For example, I could do something like select this li element that is present inside this ul. So I could do something like ul, and then li. So this ul and li, what this would do is this would look for the li elements that are present inside this ul, every single li element present inside this ul, and that would apply the properties that are given here, right here. So if I'm going to refresh the page, you can see that the entire thing has changed its color to blue. So this is about children selectors, and you can also be more specific in this case. For example, if you can go into two or three more levels deeper inside. For example, if I'm going to do it like this, you can see that there are two anchor tags in this unordered list. One is present as a sub of another list item, and the other thing is just as a list item. So this is two steps deeper, and this is just a single step deeper. What I have done here is I've just selected the two-step deeper anchor element, and I've changed the color to blue. Let me just change it to black, because by default the anchor tags are blue in color. Red. Okay, save it up and refresh the page. You can see that only this link has changed its color to red. And so that is about selecting the child elements. And then there is also something called as an adjacent selector. So what an adjacent selector means is that if I'm just gonna let me just first select this paragraph right here using the class para. And then if I'm gonna use an adjacent selector, I need to use the plus symbol followed by the element that I need to select. For example, if I'm going to select the next paragraph, so what an adjacent selector does is that it just selects the first paragraph. This paragraph is first selected. It then looks for the next paragraph element, because I've just specified P here, and so that would look for the next paragraph in this document next to this thing, and then that will apply the styles that are given here. So what is going to happen here is it'll just change the color of this particular paragraph here to red. So if I'm going to refresh the page, you can see that that has happened. And so this is about adjacent selectors. And the most important thing is something called as a pseudo selector. So what pseudo selectors does is it can basically change the color, the color to color of that particular selected element when it is hovered or when it is active or when it is like clicked or something like that. So if I'm going to use like a pseudo selector, let me just use the hover. So note that there is no like no spaces between these colons right here. So what will happen now is if I'm going to hover over this paragraph, the color will change to red. So refresh this and you can see that the color changes to red when I hover over it. So this is about the hover element. And there are also something called as a before and after. They are special pseudo selectors. Like if I'm going to use before, then some text will get added before that particular selected element. And so in this case, let me use the checkbox that is present here. So it has a class of check. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to select that check and use the before property. And it has a special property called as content, and that would add this content before that particular checkbox. So let me say hello world and refresh this. You can see that hello world has been added before this checkbox right here. And so this is the before selector, and similarly there is also an after selector. And there is also something called as a star selector, the all selector. If I'm going to use all star here, then I'm going to change the color to red. This is like an universal selector. This will just select the entire DOM, every single element present in this DOM. You can see that everything has got a color of red. And so that is it about the all selector. And now let's take a look at the next selector, and that is the pseudo selector, the first child pseudo selector. So what the first child pseudo selector does is, let me just type it in first. So first child. So what it does is it just takes a look at all the li elements that are present inside this document and just selects the first li element of every UL that is present inside this document. So this will be selected and this will be selected. And so when I refresh the document, you can see that this entire thing has been turned into red. This is because this entire thing makes up the first li element. And so this has a color of red and this has a color of red. And so then and similarly can also use the nth child element to select any for example, you can use the nth child element to select the like the fifth element or the third element and so on. So in this case, let me just select the second element. So this is the syntax, and so click on the refresh button. You can see that the second li element of every UL has been selected and it has been turned to red because that is the property that is mentioned here. And so these are the last cell and the first cell elements, and you can also use different types of selectors. For example, to just take a look at the entire list of selectors that are present in CSS, you can just go to this site, W3 Schools CSS selector reference, and so here are the list of entire selectors that can be used in your CSS. And similarly, one more important type of selector that you could use is the input selector. For example, if you're just going to type an input right here, that would select the entire input element that is entire input elements that are present inside your your document. And so instead of that, you can use this square brackets. You can type in type equals checkbox, for example. That would select only the checkbox element that is present inside this, and type in display none. So what it would do is it would just select the checkbox elements. So here is one, and we'll just change the display to none. And so you can see that the checkbox has been disabled. This checkbox text right here, that is a label, not an like a checkbox. So that is another type of important CSS selector. And so the remaining CSS selectors are present here. You can just take a look at this thing, this table of reference, and this is really useful, trust me. And so if you're going to use this more efficiently, then it could even replace some of your JavaScript. So you can use CSS to replace JavaScript in some cases, and that would really be more efficient and a bit more it could reduce your load time in some cases. And so try to be more efficient by using CSS selectors. And so that is the end of the video. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and do make sure that you subscribe to us. Bye.